Good morning, Ebenezer. This is Kerry Mullen, your Minister of Education students, back after a week off with your Sunday school lesson for August 2nd. Now, let me start by saying sorry that I didn't get a video up last week. There were a lot of demands on my time for various reasons last week and just didn't get it done with the time I had last week. So I appreciate your understanding for me not getting one done last week. Now, moving on to today's lesson, we're going to be moving into Proverbs 23. And so Proverbs 23 is right in the middle of a section of Proverbs that's kind of known as the 30 sayings or the 30 wise sayings or the 30 sayings of the wise in Proverbs. And that's just what we've called them. They're not necessarily called that by anybody or within Proverbs itself, but we have those, and that's what we call them. And it's just this section of Proverbs that is in here, and it's kind of collected sayings. And what we probably think is some of these aren't necessarily original to Solomon. This may have been just kind of conventional wisdom that was around that had come from other people in and around Israel at the time, and the Lord had led Solomon to collect those things that lined up with God's wisdom. And include them here in Proverbs, include them in what he was passing on to his sons. And so here we have them. Now, today, Solomon's main thrust, what he's mainly going to talk about after the first few verses that we're going to look at, he then moves into talking about drunkenness. And I want to be specific with drunkenness because what we're going to talk about today is we're going to stick to what Solomon is talking about because alcohol and drunkenness is a big topic, and there is quite a bit to talk about in relation to alcohol and drunkenness and Christian wisdom and all that. And so, but for today, we're going to stick just with drunkenness, with what and how Solomon is approaching wine, is what he refers to here, and drunkenness. And so we're just going to stick with that today because that's what he's talking about. We don't want to overstep because if we're going to have a full discussion about alcohol and drunkenness, we could definitely spend at least 2 weeks on that, probably more, especially if we were actually like face-to-face talking about this and not just me talking to a computer, which you guys are watching later. So all that just to say, we're going to stick with what Solomon is looking at today, what he's talking about, how he's talking about drunkenness and wine. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right into our verses for today. Starting out, we'll be looking at Proverbs chapter 23, verses 17 through 18. And this is what it says. Don't let your heart envy sinners. Instead, always fear the Lord, for then you will have a future and your hope will not be dashed. So it starts with, don't let your heart envy sinners. And the Hebrew word that's translated envy here, it means a strong desire to have something, and I think we understand that. But it also includes a resentment that you don't have it. So you want something, and then you have a very strong emotional reaction to the fact that you don't have something. You're angry about the fact that you don't have something. And it's interesting that we as Christians do have this thing where we can look at the lifestyle or lifestyles of the world and see something attractive in them. We feel a desire to live that lifestyle too, or at least a form of that lifestyle. It's very easy to look around at the world and go, man, sure wish I could just do whatever I wanted, or sure wish I could just be that way or this way. And we say that a lot of times with like sarcasm, like, oh, must be nice to just be able to do what you want. But in that sarcasm and that joke a little bit, there's a little hint of truth there of going, it does seem really nice to just be able to not care about morality and just do whatever you wish. And so Solomon advises here that instead of holding on to that envy, right, instead of wanting that lifestyle, rather to fear the Lord instead. And he says, always. And as we have said before, wrapped up in fearing the Lord is this covenant relationship and that involves keeping God's commands and then the blessings and curses that follow from keeping those or not keeping those. And that's why fearing the Lord is set against not envying sinners here or envying sinners here. Either you go your own way or you follow the Lord. And I think it's understandable that a sinner's lifestyle could be attractive to a Christian, right? Because it kind of is, right? I maybe it's maybe a bit like me when you when you're trying to be healthy, right? Trying to eat right and drink your water and do all the good things to lose weight or just be healthy, whatever. And then you go to work or you go somewhere else and you see people and maybe they're, they have McDonald's or maybe they have Chick-fil-A or maybe it's KFC or Popeyes. And you're looking at your salad and you're thinking, man, I wish I had some McDonald's right now. A Big Mac sure sounds better than this salad I have. And you want that, right? And then you start looking at that salad and you're like, stupid salad. Hate salads. I want a Big Mac. Right? And so, in that same way, it is possible for a Christian to fall into this place where you're looking at a sinner's lifestyle, rather, and from time to time had that feeling of, man, it would be nice just to not care about the stuff I care about, right? I gotta follow these rules, right? If we're being honest, I'm sure we've all felt that way from time to time since we've become a Christian. Right? Sure, it would be easier just to let go of this and not do all this. But Solomon warns us against desiring that kind of lifestyle or encouraging or fostering those feelings that we can have, but to continue always in the fear of the Lord. Now, why? Solomon says, for then, if you continue to fear the Lord always, then you will have a future and your hope will not be dashed. And the other side of that that's implied there is that following that sinner's lifestyle, you do not have a future and your hope will be dashed. Now, having a future can be seen, as we have said before, as generally having a long life because you're not intentionally doing things that will have negative outcomes that shorten your life. And that is true. So we said that before. But the Hebrew term that's used here, that's translated this way, means something more. And more literally, it means that which comes after. And I think this is pointing more to what comes after death rather than just future current consequences. Because it says, for then you will have a future. You will have something that comes after. And your hope will not be dashed. I think Solomon using those things here, to me, points more to an eternal consequence that I think is wrapped up in the fear of the Lord and the covenant nature of that being a blessings that come from fearing the Lord and following His ways. I think it's pointing more to an eschatological or end times future, other world future here, rather than just a future that's right now or physical in nature. So Solomon is reinforcing here the idea that what we do here, how we live, does have immediate consequences, but also has eternal consequences. And the only way to secure those positive, eternal consequences is to fear the Lord always. And again, going back to our diet picture, I know for me, as I'm trying to eat properly, trying to keep myself fit and healthy, better than anything else that aids me in staying the path, right? Staying on the course, the healthy course I'm trying to stay on, is remembering what the positive consequences of me staying healthy and being healthy are, and also remembering what the negative consequences of me not being healthy are. And so as I walk around, right, I know where all the Mountain Dews are in the youth room. I have a key to the door that gets me to those. I know where those are every day. And occasionally I'll go, a Mountain Dew sounds real good right about now. And sometimes I even unlock the door and look at those Mountain Dews. But here's what I do. When I look at those Mountain Dews, I go, that's an early grave. Like, giving into this now, the more I give into it, is really not setting me up for a long life. It's probably, at least in a small way, encouraging me to a shorter life, or at least a long life that's filled with problems and complications. And so I just like to remind myself when I'm staring at that bag of peanut M&Ms, I'm giving away like all my weaknesses here. When I'm staring at that bag of peanut M&Ms or that Mountain Dew or whatever it is, I just remind myself, that's death. That's death. And it's a lot easier for me to resist those M&Ms or that Mountain Dew when I think of the long-term consequences up against the short-term good taste in my mouth that I'm going to get, right? The short-term sweetness I'm going to get is outweighed when I think of the long-term consequences. And that's what Solomon is pointing to here. He's saying, look, don't envy their lifestyle. Like, it may seem really tempting now, but if you really consider what is in store for those people that live that lifestyle, it's not what you want. So fear the Lord. Right, and in this way, he says, keep your mind focused on the future, on what's to come, on the consequences of your actions, and focus on the long play rather than the short play. And that's what he has us wanting us to focus on here. So that brings us to our first set of questions for today. And again, I'll ask these and then give you a second to pause the video so you can talk about, discuss, or just think about these things, and then we'll hop into our next set of verses for our next passage. So, question 1. How does having assurance of eternal benefits help you avoid acting on worldly desires? Question 2. What resources are available to you to help you resist envying the sinner's lifestyle? I'll give you a couple seconds and I'll be right back. So now we're moving on to still in chapter 23, but verses 19 through 21. And now we're going to get into really the chunky part of our verses for today, and that deals with drunkenness, like I said before. So starting in verse 19, this is what Solomon says. It says, "Listen, my son, and be wise. Keep your mind on the right course. Don't associate with those who drink too much wine, or with those who gorge themselves on meat. For the drunkard and the glutton will become poor, and grogginess will clothe them in rags." Well, Solomon begins this this passage, with basically saying, hey, pay attention and be strong enough to do what I'm telling you to do. Keep your head on straight. So then he addresses excessive alcohol and food consumption. As I said before, alcohol at least is a large subject, and for today's purposes, we're going to restrict our conversation around what Solomon specifically addresses here. So Solomon says not to associate with those who drink too much wine or eat too much meat. Now, it is interesting to note that Solomon here is putting these two sinful behaviors of excess, drunkenness and gluttony, on the same moral level. He's putting them right there next to each other. He says, don't associate with people that do this or that do this. He says not to associate with them. And I like how the NIV translates this particular Hebrew word here, because it's in the NIV. If you're reading out of the NIV, it says not to join them. And so what is being presented here is not, don't ever be around these people. Don't ever be in their presence. Jesus himself would have violated that wisdom. If you recall the many times he was questioned about hanging out with sinners of all kinds, and that included drunks in and among them. Rather, what Solomon is saying here, and that's why I like what the NIV, how the NIV translates it here, is to not participate with them in their drunkenness and gluttony, these sins of excess. He says, don't participate with them. When this is happening, don't be in there with them. Don't fall into this trap of drunkenness and gluttony along with these people. You can see how it kind of ties into what the passage we just talked about, the verses we just talked about, where it says, hey, don't envy the sinner's lifestyle. Someone says, hey, don't envy the drunk. Don't envy the glutton. Like, I know it seems like a party, right? Drinking as much as you want, eating all the food that you want. But there are some negative consequences to that he gets into later on. Now, I would be remiss, however, not to give a word of warning about being in the presence of those who are given to these or really any sins. Because we need to be mindful of the sins to which we are particularly susceptible. And what I mean by that is you know what you struggle with, and you know what you don't necessarily struggle with. And so there's not a hard and fast rule for do be around these people, don't be around these people, or 15 minutes is fine with these people, but 30 minutes is okay with these people. It's different for everybody. You have to absorb things like Proverbs so that you can gain wisdom and then make your own choices about who and when and how much you need to be around people. So we need to be particular of these particular sins that we're susceptible to. And those sins, you may not be able to stand the temptation of being around someone who does or is participating in those particular sins, again, that you know are particular weak points for you. For instance, for a recovering alcoholic, it's a bad idea to go to a bar or a party or even just somebody's house for a meal that's going to be drinking, especially if they're going to be drinking to excess. Why? Because, well, you know you struggle with that sin already. And if you knowingly go somewhere where there's going to be exceptional temptation for you, well, you're just setting yourself up for failure. And again, that doesn't just apply to alcohol. I've applied it to alcohol and drunkenness here, but it applies to any sin at all. If you are susceptible to it, then you have to be mindful of it. You have to be aware of it. You have to know what your limits are for being around that particular sin. So while it's not prohibited to be around sinners being sinful, and I think that's an important point to make, that we're never told to just seclude ourselves from the culture around us, from the sinners around us, the non-Christians around us, and just be in our own little, clump of Christians together and avoid them altogether. But it's not always wise to be around certain sins and certain sinners, depending on your own susceptibility to certain things. And everybody has to make their own judgment on who to be around and how much to be around them. So then Solomon moves on to the consequences of these sins of excess. He says that these people, the drunkard and the glutton, will become poor and lazy. Because see, these excessive lifestyles are destructive. And I think we can apply that wisdom to any excessive lifestyle that, along with drunkenness and gluttony, an excessive lifestyle of materialism, right? Whether that be clothes, cars, technology, houses, boats, whatever, that an excessive lifestyle of those is destructive, right? Because you lose money, you spend all your money, your time on those things. But specifically, looking at drunkenness and gluttony, if you just look around today, you can see the vast negative effects that drunkenness and gluttony have all around us today. They are sure to shorten your lifespan. And even if they don't shorten your lifespan, they can contribute to some pretty serious medical issues for you going forward. And so while you may have a longer life, it's not necessarily a life that you would choose to live, but you may be in that position because of your choices for these sins of excess. And you can end up spending a lot of time and a lot of money on these things. And that time and money probably should be used on other things. In fact, if you remember prohibition in America, when alcohol was outlawed altogether, that prohibition was actually less about anybody's feelings of morality towards alcohol in general. Really what it was about the time and money that husbands and fathers were spending on alcohol in the bars. Because what was common during this time was that men would get off work and they would go straight to the bar. They'd spend their paycheck at the bar and come home late at night drunk as a skunk, go to sleep, get up and go to work the next day. And so not only were they not bringing money home to the family because they were spending it all at the bar, they're also spending all their time at the bar. So they were not spending any time with their wives or their children. And it got so bad, like the problem with alcohol got so bad right before prohibition, that the wives and mothers saw their only way to fix this problem was to lobby for alcohol to just be illegal across the board. And so we can see, just from that, we see these sins of excess can cause problems, not just for the people participating in them, but also for the people around them. And so these sins of excess are bad and have bad consequences. And even if for just that reason alone, we should stay away from them. And that leads me to our second set of questions for today. Again, I'll ask them, give you a couple seconds to think about and discuss them, and then be right back. Question 1. How should Christians balance staying away from temptation with being around sinners who need to hear and see the gospel? And question 2, how important are Christian friends to keeping that balance? I'll give you a few seconds to discuss, talk about that, think about it. We'll be right back. So now we're going to take a little jump ahead in Proverbs chapter 23. We're going to jump to verse 29 through 32. And starting in verse 29, this is what it says. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has conflicts? Who has complaints? Who has wounds for no reason? Who has red eyes? Those who linger over wine, those who go looking for mixed wine. Don't gaze at wine because it is red, because it gleams in the cup and goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a snake and stings like a viper. Solomon begins this saying with a series of questions that are rhetorical and maybe just a little bit sarcastic. And he begins with these questions because the only answer that satisfies all of these questions is the drunkard. And that is his answer that he gives. He says, who is this? The one who lingers over wine. We might say the one who likes to stay in his cups, so to speak. The one who is either constantly drinking wine many times throughout the day, or the one who drinks a whole lot of wine in one sitting. And he says those who go looking for mixed wine. Now, what this is referencing here is not just some kind of, mixing of wines or something like that, but rather it's talking about people who would take wine and then mix it with certain spices or other ingredients to either make it smoother or to increase its potency. So the alcohol would have a stronger, quicker, or longer lasting effect on them. And in keeping with his point about drunkenness, Solomon is pointing to the people who approach wine for the purpose of getting drunk, to drink as much as it takes for the alcohol to affect them. either through how much they drink or through seeking out the strongest drink possible. And it's important to note here that in this section, what he is talking about is people who are drinking for the sole purpose of getting drunk, right? That's what is in view here for Solomon. He's not answering any other question about alcohol other than, hey, people who drink for the only reason to get drunk. What about those guys? That's what Solomon is addressing here. So he continues and says, don't gaze at wine because it is red. Now, in talking about the redness of the wine, Solomon is referring to this idea that the darker the red color of the wine, the stronger it was. So when Solomon says, don't gaze at wine because it's red, he's saying don't desire the wine because of its potency, how quickly or strongly it can affect you. Again, his point is wanting wine for the purpose of getting drunk. And he says it looks good in the cup and it tastes good, but in the end, it's going to come back to bite you if you're doing it for the purpose of getting drunk. So that's going to bring us to our last set of, or not our last set of questions, our third set of questions for today. And again, I'll ask them, give you a minute to think about them, discuss them, and then we'll be right back to finish up. So question 1. Given Solomon's advice here to not seek wine for its drunken effect, is there wisdom in staying away from alcohol altogether? Question 2 is kind of a follow-up to that. Is alcohol the only thing we would put in this category, something to be avoided because of a certain effect it can have on us? And then what else might need to be avoided altogether because of its potential for sinful abuse? That is, those things that are okay, but the potential sinful abuse for them is so great that they should be just avoided altogether. Is there anything else that fits in with that? Again, I'll wait for a few seconds. You can pause the video, discuss this, and then we'll be right back. So then Solomon continues in verses 33 through 35. He says this, your eyes will see strange things, and you will say absurd things. You'll be like someone sleeping out at sea or lying down on the top of a ship's mast. They struck me, but I feel no pain. They beat me, but I didn't know it. When will I wake up? I'll look for another drink. So Solomon here is pointing out some of the negative effects of drunkenness, that you'll see things wrongly. You will say things wrongly. The reference to being lying down on top of a ship's mast or being on a ship, being asleep on a ship at sea, is talking about a drunk's inability to walk correctly. Right? Because if you're on the top of a mast on a ship that's in the ocean, it's going side to side. For every little bit that the deck of the ship moves, the top of the very top of the mast in the crow's nest is going to move quite a bit. And trying to stand up under that just makes you shaky, and that's what he's talking about here. And then at the end, the drunk going through all this, seeing strange things, saying absurd things, not walking right, being struck but not feeling the pain, beaten and not knowing it, not being able to wake up. The solution? Go back for more drinks. Why not? Right? Goes back to the thing that caused the problem in the first place. Looking for a solution. And what Solomon really is pointing out here is the nature of addiction. And I do find it interesting that Solomon sees it and understands addiction so clearly here that all of these things that are wrong, and then for the drunk, for the addict, what's the solution? Well, to just go get more drink. Right? Maybe I just haven't had enough, or I've got all these problems that have been caused by alcohol, so what am I going to go do to fix it? Well, I'll go get more alcohol to forget about the problems, but then that's going to cause me more problems I'm going to need more alcohol for. And it's this cycle. And Solomon just really clearly, thousands of years ago, sees it for what it is, sees the cycle of addiction, sees the danger of addiction and the harm that addiction does. And so that's really short, but that's really what this is about. And that's going to bring us to our last set of questions for today. So question one, what is the danger for Christians of becoming involved in anything, not only wine, that could lead to addiction? And then question two, as a church, how can we be able to help those who are struggling with addiction? Again, I'll pause, give you time to think about, discuss those, and we'll be right back to pray and end. Well, thank you for being with us today. I hope that it was insightful, maybe had some good discussion. Again, I know alcohol is like a really large subject, but we did had to limit our discussion today to what Solomon was talking about, or again, we would have been here forever. With that said, if you have any questions about alcohol or drunkenness that weren't covered here, if you have a question about what we did cover here, feel free to come find me anytime we're here. If you're here for services or on Wednesday night, or if you need to call me or text me or anything, I'd be glad to talk to anybody about some of these issues, because I know it's a big subject. I know there's probably a lot of questions around alcohol and all of this kind of stuff. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody about it if you feel like you need to. With that said, let's pray and then we'll close. Father in heaven, we thank you for today. Thank you for everything you've given us. Thank you for giving us another day to praise you and try to live lives that glorify you. Father, help us to stay away from addictive things. Help us to be mindful of those sins that we are susceptible to be able to avoid those, Father, but give us the strength to share the gospel with people who are in those things, but also to stay away from that temptation and resist that temptation ourselves. Be with us as we go throughout this week. Give us opportunities to share the gospel and give us the boldness to take those opportunities. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, have a good Sunday, Ebenezer. Hope to see you soon.